Welcome to the one practice for the Canadian Grand Prix sprint weekend, which might have made things a bit difficult for drivers as we had 3 red flags, and as you know, one practice isn't always enough. With teams bringing a ton of upgrades, especially Mercedes, they've seemed to have secured their favor for the championship. Kimi and George secured the top 2, with Lewis in 3rd, which clearly showed that he was about to enjoy his Ferrari this weekend. Moving into sprint qualifying, SQ2 got really close for Red Bull, just 8th and 9th. Even Lindblad out-qualified both of them. Good for him. Audi again qualified at the tip of the top 10. Does it mean they're keeping up with the PEX upgrades? It would be good to see more improvement later on in the season. Up in front, George was finally matching Kimi's performance in qualifying. He got sprint pole, leaving Kimi just 0.068 seconds between them. Even though Kimi had the potential to qualify ahead, he seemed to just lose a little bit more than George on his qualifying runs. This could explain why they were this close this weekend. Maybe one of the cleanest race starts we've seen this year. I barely even noticed Ferrari's advantage, especially with regards to their super starts. Kudos to Mercedes, I guess. And Toto's boys immediately started checking out, and Kimi was already glued to George's gearbox. It was clear George didn't have everything under control. I mean, he had a reason to be worried. I don't know why I see Max in Kimi, but I see why Toto Wolff was so obsessed with this kid. Kimi shot his shot twice for the lead, and both times it compromised him. George is a fantastic driver. Kimi needs to learn how to pass George in a clever way. He was so livid that Russell was being naughty, but I personally think Kimi wasn't going to make that corner in a clean way, and George had to punish him for it. Norris opportunistically got P2 from this incident, and from here onwards, it was a little bit easier for George to manage P1. He still had to absorb some pressure from Norris, but he was clearly on his way to conclude the sprint in P1. Qualifying was pretty close between Toto's boys again, and you know this meant we were about to get part 2 of the sprint race. Interestingly, they were separated by similar margins as they were in sprint qualifying. Absolutely insane stuff. Kimi's potential loss suggests that he wasn't completely comfortable this weekend, which could explain why George was actually performing slightly better. They shouldn't have been this close. Kimi was losing close to a 10th on his best qualifying run. Also looking at Leclerc, he had qualified 8th and he was out-qualified by Isaac Hedger on merit. Race day, lap 1, conditions looked very dodgy, and McLaren decided to use their big brains and gamble on intermediate tires for the damp conditions. I always ask myself what goes on in the strategic planning rooms when a team decides to go for intermediate tires while the rest of the grid decides to go dry. It almost worked out as Kimi and George started terribly, and Lando pulled a Leclerc and claimed the lead into turn 1. Yeah, Lando. Oscar seemed to be struggling on those intermediates. Lando seemed to have a bit more grip, especially in those early stages. Max fancied to take Oscar's place just when Oscar got into the pits and decided he's had enough of those intermediates. And by lap 2, McLaren was already regretting their strategy as they also called Lando in. What a disaster. They let the pack through, with Kimi inheriting the lead, followed by George, Hamilton and Max. And immediately, Kimi and George started squabbling for track position. They were going kamikaze bomber for kamikaze bomber. On lap 6, George attacked Kimi beautifully and Kimi almost rear-ended George trying to outbrake him. If George is going to win this championship, it's going to be by his experience, because that was well executed. And guys, there were 4 terrorists in the top 4. Max and Lewis were also having their fun, and this was giving some room for George and Kimi to fight for driver number 1. And George was definitely closer to his faster teammate this weekend. George is fighting an aggressive Italian driver here. On lap 12, they had another moment as Kimi dived into the inside with so much speed, my heart jumped a bit. And it almost looked like George gave Kimi a little extra space because it was that close. On lap 17, George had another lockup, and you can't do this with a driver like Kimi behind you. As they negotiated for the lead, I was actually impressed with George keeping it given his mistake. The next time George messes up the same corner, Kimi knew exactly what to do and he took that place from him. The traffic probably helped a bit, but you can't keep compromising your exits in the same corner. This was almost inevitable. Kimi wasn't perfect either, because on lap 24, he suffered a lockup in the same corner. Notice how they handled these differently. Kimi tried to recover from this, and they definitely touched wheels, and this pushed Kimi off track, with him maintaining the lead. His team asked him to give the position back, which he didn't completely agree with, rightfully so, and man, while George was in the lead in lap 30, his engine decided it had had enough, and that moment changed the race completely, and not for the best. The safety car got called out to recover George's car, and I was absolutely gutted for him because they were really putting on a good show for us. And it was obviously going to be a pretty straightforward race for Kimi. I hoped it wouldn't be a boring one from this point. Follow me on X if you want to argue Formula 1 sometime. Not much happened after Russell's incident, and it was lap 51 when Lewis started catching Max, and the Brit was cooking. Max led and defended all the way to lap 62, and in an unexpected move, Lewis overtook Max around the outside, and I don't think Max saw that one coming. And that's how you beat him, because he always sees them coming. And finally, Kimi wrapped up the race with his 4th win of the season. That might have been the first time I've enjoyed the Canadian Grand Prix track, if ever. Would definitely rate the first 30 laps a 10 out of 10. But thereafter, a solid 6. 6.5 at best. If you enjoy my summarized race data reviews, consider becoming a subby, and I'll catch you in Monaco. Not that I'll be there.